I was credentialed as press. Third row, left aisle, behind the Ceylon diplomatic staff, and 2 seats from the Cathali trade observer. A decent seat for a routine proceeding. And that's all the second anniversary compliance review was supposed to be. I'd cleared 2 hours on my schedule. Most correspondents in the gallery hadn't cleared 1. The Ceylon Dominion Senate convened at the top of the hour. 41 senators in graduated tiers of polished obsidian, their formal session robes, charcoal silver-threaded, cut high to the collarbone in the Ceylon manner, arranged with the kind of geometric precision only a species that treats symmetry as civic law can manage. The glass dome overhead let in broad shafts of late-afternoon light that pooled on the marble floor below the speaker's platform. Beyond the glass, the orbital docks of Sereth Prime were visible in a bright daytime sky. Half a dozen cruisers in standard formation, pale hulls catching the sun. The chamber smelled faintly of ozone and old stone. It always did. The compliance review was item 11 on the session docket. 10 items of procedural housekeeping before the matter of whether humanity still had teeth. I'd covered the original treaty signing 2 years earlier. Earth's delegation had arrived with 7 people. No military escort. No warships in orbit. They signed every article of the Accord of Diminished Hostilities, a name the Senate had chosen, and which Earth's delegation never once contested. Full disarmament of all offensive fleet assets beyond a single patrol wing. Decommissioning of the Vantara shipyards. Transparent energy output registries submitted to the Senate's Bureau of Strategic Audit. Quarterly compliance filings, on time, in the Bureau's own format. The reports had arrived on schedule, every quarter. Clean, unremarkable. The kind of paperwork you file and forget. Senator Pravin Dole opened the review with the satisfaction of someone confirming what he already knew. He read the Bureau's summary findings aloud. Earth's fleet tonnage reduced by 94%. Vantara yards sealed and cold. Energy registries consistent with civilian-grade output across all monitored grids. He used the phrase, a model of cooperative disarmament. 2 senators in the upper tier inclined their heads. In the press gallery, 3 correspondents were already drafting summaries. The Cathali observer beside me had not looked up from her notes. At the respondents' table below the tiers, Earth's delegation sat without expression. 4 of them. The lead envoy, a woman I recognized from the original signing, mid-50s, cropped gray hair, a plain dark coat with no insignia or rank markers, had her hands folded on the table. She had not spoken since the session opened. She hadn't needed to. I had my stylus on the tablet. I was planning 3 paragraphs and an early departure. Then the Bureau's chief auditor, a Siran named Catherine Vore, took the speaker's platform. She was not smiling. She had brought 9 data tablets instead of the standard 2, and she set them in a careful row on the lectern, flat, side by side, evenly spaced, not stacked, laid out like exhibits before a tribunal. I noticed the envoy glance at the tablets. Her expression didn't shift. She turned back to the front and resettled her hands. Vore began with the energy registries. She acknowledged that the quarterly filings were internally consistent, numbers within expected variance, no flags on initial review. But the Bureau had cross-referenced the filed data against independent sensor readings from the Cathali Border Monitoring Array. A routine verification, she said, not prompted by suspicion. And the readings did not reconcile. Earth's civilian energy grid was producing between 18 and 23% more output than the filed registries reported. The discrepancy was consistent. It appeared in every filing. It had been present since the first quarterly submission. Senator Dahl leaned forward in his seat. Clarify the margin. Vore clarified. She placed the numbers on the chamber's central display. 2 columns, filed output and observed output, side by side. The gap was not ambiguous, not in aggregate, not when you watch the same variance hold, quarter after quarter, inside the same narrow band. A rounding error doesn't repeat 8 times in the same direction. I watched the human delegation. The lead envoy's hands had not moved. The man seated to her right, younger, dark-skinned, carrying the posture of someone who had worn a uniform recently enough for it to stay in his shoulders, was looking at a fixed point above the senators' heads, not evading attention, waiting for something he had already expected. Vor moved to the shipyard records. Vantara had been sealed per the accord. The Bureau's own assessors had physically inspected the facility. Seals intact, docks depressurized, fabrication bays cold. All confirmed, but Vor's team had traced construction-grade alloy purchases routed through 14 civilian shell contracts over the past 19 months. The volumes were not consistent with infrastructure maintenance. They were consistent with hull fabrication at industrial scale. The murmuring stopped. The chamber was quiet now, the way a room goes quiet when people begin listening with their whole bodies instead of their ears. She brought up a cargo manifest. 17 individual shipments of military specification reactor cores, purchased through a medical equipment subsidiary, registered on Callan Station. The cores had cleared customs as replacement power units for hospital-class facilities. Earth's filed infrastructure reports listed no new hospital construction in that period. None. Senator Dahl stood. The obsidian of his chair caught the dome light. Around him, other senators were turning, not to confer, but to look at the respondents' table, where the 4 humans sat in the same positions they had held since the start of the session. Ambassador. His voice carried the careful modulation of a man who had not yet decided whether to be furious or afraid. These discrepancies require immediate clarification. The woman at the respondents' table looked at him. She did not stand. She did not unfold her hands. She did not reach for a data tablet or glance at her colleagues. She said nothing. Dahl waited. The chamber waited. I stopped writing. Vor continued. She had a third file. Deep-range observatory data from a Saran research outpost near the Palace Exclusion Zone, a region classified as uninhabited, 4 systems beyond the treaty's declared monitoring perimeter. The outpost had logged recurring thermal signatures in that sector over the past 11 months. The signatures were large, structured, moving in coordinated formation. She put the composite image on the central display. I had covered military affairs for 11 years. I knew what a fleet thermal signature looked like at range. So did every senator in that chamber. The formation geometry alone told you what you were looking at. The power output told you how many. It was not a patrol wing. The murmur came back low and spread fast through the tiers. Senators rose from their seats. Aides moved between the rows with quick, tight steps. Someone in the back tier spoke rapidly into a private channel, one hand cupped around the receiver. Dahl's senior aide placed a hand on the senator's shoulder, not to restrain him, to steady him. The Cathali observer beside me had gone motionless, her stylus frozen above her tablet. The human delegation had not moved. Not one of them. The lead envoy sat with her hands folded, her posture the same as the moment she had entered the chamber. Patient, settled, the expression of someone who is not surprised because they had never been pretending this moment wouldn't come. Dahl spoke again, lower now. The senatorial cadence stripped out of his voice entirely. You signed a treaty. The envoy looked at him. The treaty, she said, required a compliance report. She paused, the dome light held on the marble. We filed one. 9 words. She didn't explain. She didn't qualify. She didn't stand, didn't raise her voice, didn't gesture at the display behind her, where the fleet's thermal bloom still glowed against the Senate's own projection field. The chamber went silent, not the silence of decorum, not the pause between agenda items, the silence of a governing body recalculating its position in real time. 41 senators, their staffs, the full press gallery, visiting delegations from 6 systems, and no one spoke, because there was no procedural framework for what had just been said, no precedent in Saran deliberative law for a species that honored every clause of an accord, and hollowed out its meaning from inside the margins. Earth had done everything the treaty required. Filed the reports, sealed the shipyard they were told to seal, accepted the inspections, submitted the registries in the Bureau's own format, on the Bureau's own schedule, and in the space between what the Senate had thought to demand and what the accord actually required Earth to disclose, they had built something the Dominion's own instruments were only now beginning to register. I sat in the third row and understood what I had not understood at the original signing. The delegation that arrived 2 years earlier with 7 people, no escort, and an unsigned copy of an accord they would sign without a single objection, had not been surrendering. They had been buying time, and they had purchased exactly enough of it. The dome light was warm on the marble floor. The fleet signatures held steady on the display. The envoy's hands stayed folded on the table. Senator Dahl sat down. Nobody in the chamber asked another question.